The crystal chandeliers of Chicago's Art Institute cast golden light across 500 of the city's most powerful people. Sarah Mitchell stood at the edge of the crowd, her hand resting protectively on her 7-month pregnant belly, watching her husband work the room like a master conductor. Marcus Mitchell commanded attention effortlessly. At 35, he was already the youngest partner at Preston, Williams and Associates, the city's most prestigious law firm. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his $1,000 suit tailored to perfection. Politicians sought his advice. CEOs hired him to make their problems disappear. Tonight, at the Children's Hospital Charity Gala, he was building the foundation for his next ambition, Mayor of Chicago. "Sarah, darling, you look radiant," said Margaret Preston, the firm's senior partner's wife. Her smile was warm, but Sarah caught the way her eyes lingered on the modest maternity dress Sarah had altered herself. "Thank you, Mrs. Preston. The baby's been active tonight." Sarah forced a smile, placing both hands on her belly as the baby kicked. She had once been confident in rooms like this. 3 years ago, she had been a rising prosecutor in the district attorney's office, known for her sharp mind and unwavering ethics. Now she felt like a decoration in Marcus's carefully constructed image. Across the room, Marcus was deep in conversation with Senator Harrison, the man whose support could guarantee Marcus's political future. Beside them stood Elena Rodriguez, a junior associate at Marcus's firm. Elena was everything Sarah once was: ambitious, sharp-dressed, commanding attention. Her red dress hugged her curves perfectly, and when she leaned in to whisper something in Marcus's ear, Sarah felt her stomach twist. "The senator's wife couldn't make it tonight," Elena had mentioned casually earlier. "I'll need to handle his personal account details." The way she said personal made Sarah's skin crawl. A waiter passed by with a tray of wine glasses. Sarah reached for sparkling water instead, her hand trembling slightly. The baby shifted again, pressing against her ribs, and she winced. "Mrs. Mitchell, are you all right?" The waiter's concerned voice drew attention from nearby guests. "I'm fine, just—" Sarah started to say, but as she moved, her elbow bumped the tray. Red wine splashed across the white tablecloth and onto Senator Harrison's jacket. The conversation stopped. The senator looked down at his stained jacket, then up at Sarah. The silence stretched like a held breath. "I'm so sorry, Senator," Sarah began, reaching for napkins. "Let me—" "Sarah." Marcus's voice cut through the air like a blade. His smile never wavered, but his eyes had gone cold. "How clumsy of you." The word clumsy landed like a slap. Around them, guests pretended not to notice the tension, but Sarah could feel their stares, their judgment. She was the pregnant wife who couldn't even hold herself together at an important event. "It's quite all right," Senator Harrison said graciously, but Sarah caught the irritation in his voice. "These things happen." "They certainly do," Marcus said, his hand finding Sarah's elbow in what looked like a supportive gesture, but felt like a warning. "Sarah's been overwhelmed lately. The pregnancy hormones, you understand." Heat flooded Sarah's cheeks. Around them, she heard the murmur of agreement, the knowing nods. "Poor Marcus," they seemed to say. "Dealing with an unstable wife while trying to build his career." Elena stepped forward smoothly. "Senator, perhaps we could continue our discussion about the infrastructure bill in the quiet room upstairs. I have all the documents you need to review." "Excellent idea, Ms. Rodriguez," the senator replied, already moving away from the stained table. "Marcus, shall we?" Marcus's grip tightened on Sarah's arm. "Of course. Sarah, why don't you go home and rest? You clearly need it." It wasn't a suggestion. Sarah nodded, her throat tight with unshed tears. As the three of them walked away, she heard Elena's laugh, bright and confident. The sound echoed in Sarah's mind as she made her way to the coat check, past the pitying glances and whispered comments. In the elevator down to the parking garage, Sarah caught her reflection in the polished steel doors. When had she become this person? When had she stopped being Sarah Chen, the prosecutor who never backed down from a fight, and become Sarah Mitchell, the pregnant wife who embarrassed her husband at important events? The answer came to her as the elevator doors opened. Gradually, then all at once. It had started with small criticisms. "You're working too much, darling. The stress isn't good for the baby." Then came the suggestions about her appearance. Perhaps something more feminine. You want to support my image, don't you? Each compromise had seemed reasonable at the time. Each step away from her career had been framed as what was best for their family. But standing in that parking garage, her hands shaking as she fumbled for her car keys, Sarah realized she had lost herself one small surrender at a time. The drive home through Chicago's empty streets gave her too much time to think. Their penthouse apartment on Lakeshore Drive felt like a museum, beautiful, pristine, and lifeless. Marcus had chosen everything, from the stark white furniture to the abstract art that meant nothing to her. Sarah sank onto the leather sofa, finally allowing herself to cry. The baby moved restlessly, as if sensing her distress. She placed both hands on her belly and whispered, "I'm sorry, little one. Mommy's going to do better. I promise." But even as she made the promise, Sarah had no idea how to keep it. Marcus held all the cards, the money, the connections, the reputation. She had given up her career, her independence, her identity. What did she have left to fight with? The sound of Marcus's key in the lock made her sit up straighter, wiping her tears. She had learned to read his moods by the way he entered their home. Tonight his footsteps were measured, controlled, dangerous. "Sarah," he called out, his voice deceptively calm. "We need to talk." Marcus entered the living room like a storm dressed in expensive fabric. He had loosened his tie but kept his jacket on, a sign that this conversation was business, not personal. Sarah remained seated on the sofa, her hands folded over her belly, trying to project a calm she didn't feel. "Do you have any idea what you cost me tonight?" Marcus began, pouring himself 3 fingers of scotch from the crystal decanter on the bar cart. He didn't offer her anything. He never did anymore. "Senator Harrison seemed understanding," Sarah started. "Understanding?" Marcus laughed, a harsh sound that made Sarah flinch. "Senator Harrison was this close to endorsing my mayoral campaign. This close." He held up his thumb and forefinger, nearly touching. "Do you know what his wife said when Elena called to apologize on our behalf?" Sarah shook her head, though she dreaded the answer. She said, and I quote, "If Marcus can't control his own household, how can he control a city?" Marcus took a long sip of his scotch, savoring both the liquor and Sarah's growing distress. "Elena spent 20 minutes explaining that your pregnancy has made you unstable." The word hit Sarah like a physical blow. Unstable? What would you call it, Sarah? You've been crying constantly, forgetting things, embarrassing me at important events. Elena suggested you might need professional help. Sarah's blood ran cold. Professional help? Marcus set down his glass and moved closer, his voice dropping to the tone he used in court when delivering a killing blow. Dr. Reyes is a respected psychiatrist. He specializes in pregnancy-related mental health issues. Elena knows him from another case. I don't need a psychiatrist, Marcus. I need... What? What do you need? His voice rose and Sarah instinctively pulled back. You need purpose? You had a career and chose to give it up for our family. You need support? I've given you everything. This apartment, financial security, social status. What more could you possibly want? Sarah wanted to scream that she wanted herself back. She wanted the confidence she'd once had, the fire that had made her one of the youngest senior prosecutors in the city's history. She wanted to matter again, to be seen as more than just an extension of her husband's ambition. Instead, she said quietly, I want to feel like myself again. Marcus studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. When he spoke again, his voice was gentle, almost loving. It was somehow more frightening than his anger. Sarah, darling, you're not yourself. You haven't been for months. The pregnancy has changed you, and not just physically. He sat beside her on the sofa, taking her hands in his. I'm worried about you, about our baby. What if these mood swings get worse after the birth? What if you hurt yourself, or the baby? I would never, of course you wouldn't, not intentionally. But postpartum depression is real, Sarah. Postpartum psychosis is real. Elena showed me the statistics. 1 in 1,000 new mothers experience complete breaks from reality. Sarah felt the room spinning slightly. Marcus's words were reasonable, concerned, loving even. But underneath them, she heard the threat. Submit to evaluation, or he would paint her as a danger to their child. Dr. Reyes is expecting your call tomorrow, Marcus continued, stroking her hair with what looked like tenderness. Just a consultation, to establish a baseline before the baby comes. It's what any responsible parent would do. Sarah nodded numbly. What choice did she have? If she refused, it would only prove his point. If she agreed, she would be walking into whatever trap he and Elena had set for her. Good girl, Marcus murmured, kissing the top of her head. I knew you'd see reason. Now, I need to make some calls. Elena's working late tonight, finalizing the senator's contract. She's incredibly dedicated. The way he said Elena's name made Sarah's stomach clench. She watched him walk toward his home office, scotch in hand, phone already pressed to his ear. Through the crack in the door, she heard him laugh at something the person on the other end said. It was the same laugh he'd once reserved for her. Alone in the living room, Sarah felt the baby kick strongly, as if in protest. She looked around the pristine space that had never felt like home and made a decision. If Marcus wanted to play games, she needed to know the rules. His laptop sat on the kitchen counter, password protected, but not impossible to crack. Sarah knew Marcus well enough to guess his passwords, combinations of his birthday, their anniversary, his law school graduation date. On the third try, the screen unlocked. Her heart pounded as she navigated to his email. What she found there made her blood freeze. There were dozens of emails between Marcus and Elena, dating back 6 months. The early ones were professional, but as Sarah scrolled down, they became increasingly personal. Hotel reservations, dinner plans, and worse, much worse. One email from Elena, sent just last week, made Sarah's hands shake. The pregnancy makes her emotional and unpredictable. Dr. Reyes agrees that a mental health evaluation could establish grounds for emergency custody if needed. Senator Harrison's wife mentioned several judges who prioritize child welfare above parental rights. We just need documentation. Sarah read the email 3 times before its full meaning sank in. They weren't just having an affair. They were planning to take her baby. The sound of Marcus's office door opening made Sarah quickly close the laptop and retreat to the sofa. Her mind raced as she tried to process what she'd discovered. How long had they been planning this? How far were they willing to go? Marcus appeared in the doorway, his phone call finished. Elena sends her regards, he said casually. She feels terrible about tonight's incident. She suggested we all have dinner this weekend to discuss strategies for managing your episodes. Sarah forced herself to smile. That sounds lovely. Excellent. I'll have Elena make reservations, somewhere quiet. Private. He moved toward the bedroom, then paused. Oh, and Sarah, I've arranged for new locks on my office door. For security reasons, you understand. Client confidentiality and all that. The message was clear. No more snooping. Sarah nodded and watched him disappear into the bedroom. She sat in the darkened living room for another hour, her mind spinning with plans and possibilities. Elena and Marcus thought they held all the cards. They had the connections, the money, the professional reputations. But they had made one crucial mistake. They had underestimated Sarah Mitchell. 3 years ago, Sarah Chen had been the prosecutor who brought down a corrupt police chief by patiently building an airtight case. She had learned how to gather evidence, how to find weaknesses in seemingly strong opponents, how to be patient when everything inside her screamed for immediate action. It was time to remember who she used to be. As Sarah finally made her way to bed, the baby kicked again, stronger this time. She placed her hand on her belly and whispered, "Don't worry, little one. Mommy's going to fight for us both." The war for her child's future was just beginning. Dr. Richard Reyes's office was designed to intimidate. Dark mahogany bookshelves lined the walls, filled with psychiatric journals and medical texts. His desk was positioned so that visitors sat in lower chairs, forced to look up at him like supplicants seeking wisdom. Sarah recognized the power play immediately and made a mental note. "Mrs. Mitchell, thank you for coming in," Dr. Reyes said, not bothering to stand when she entered. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 40, with the kind of aggressive handsomeness that suggested he was used to getting his way with women. "Your husband and Ms. Rodriguez have expressed some concerns about your mental state." Sarah sat carefully in the offered chair, maintaining perfect posture despite her growing belly. I wasn't aware that Ms. Rodriguez was qualified to make medical assessments. Dr. Reyes smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Ms. Rodriguez has worked with me on several custody cases. She has an excellent eye for identifying potential risk factors in unstable home environments. The phrase unstable home environments was clearly meant to rattle her. Sarah smiled back, equally cold. How interesting. I wasn't aware we were discussing custody today. I thought this was a prenatal consultation. Of course, Dr. Reyes said smoothly, making a note on his pad. Let's start with some basic questions. How have you been sleeping? For the next hour, Sarah answered his questions carefully. She knew he was building a case against her, so she gave him nothing to work with. When he asked about mood swings, she described normal pregnancy emotions. When he pressed about her relationship with Marcus, she spoke of the normal adjustments any couple makes during pregnancy. But Dr. Reyes was persistent. Your husband mentioned that you've been increasingly paranoid, suspicious of his work relationships, checking his phone and computer. Sarah's pulse quickened, but her voice remained steady. I think paranoid is a strong word for normal curiosity about my husband's very demanding schedule. He also mentioned an incident last week where you accused Miss Rodriguez of intentionally trying to undermine you. Sarah had never said any such thing to Marcus, which meant Elena was feeding him lies to share with Dr. Reyes. She filed that information away for later use. I'm not sure what you're referring to, Sarah said calmly. Ms. Rodriguez and I have had very few interactions. Dr. Reyes made another note, his pen scratching across the paper like fingernails on a chalkboard. Mrs. Mitchell, I'm going to be direct with you. Your husband is concerned that you're developing paranoid ideation, possibly triggered by pregnancy hormones. He's worried about what might happen after the baby's born. What exactly is he worried about? Postpartum psychosis. It affects 1 in 1,000 new mothers, but the warning signs can appear during pregnancy. Paranoia, mood instability, suspicion of loved ones. Dr. Reyes leaned forward, his voice taking on a patronizing tone. The good news is that with proper treatment and monitoring, we can prevent a full break from reality. Sarah felt the trap closing around her. Agree to treatment and she would be labeled mentally ill. Refuse, and her refusal would be seen as proof of her instability. Either way, Dr. Reyes would have documentation to support whatever custody challenge Marcus and Elena were planning. What kind of treatment are you suggesting? Sarah asked. Initially, regular therapy sessions, mood stabilizers if necessary, close monitoring as your due date approaches. Dr. Reyes set down his pen and fixed her with what was probably meant to be a compassionate look. Mrs. Mitchell, I want to help you. Your husband wants to help you, but you have to want help yourself. Sarah nodded thoughtfully, as if considering his words. In reality, she was calculating how to turn this situation to her advantage. You're right, she said finally. I have been feeling overwhelmed lately. Maybe I do need help. Dr. Reyes smiled, clearly pleased with her capitulation. Excellent. I'd like to see you twice a week until the baby comes. We'll start with talk therapy and see how you respond. Of course, and you'll be sharing your notes with my husband. Only general progress updates, patient confidentiality, you understand. Sarah understood perfectly. Dr. Reyes would share whatever information served Marcus's purposes while hiding behind medical ethics when it didn't. As she left the office, Sarah felt a familiar sensation she hadn't experienced in months, the thrill of a legal challenge. Dr. Reyes, Marcus, and Elena thought they were playing chess while she was playing checkers. They were about to learn otherwise. Her first stop was the Chicago Public Library's downtown branch. Using their public computers, Sarah began researching Dr. Reyes. What she found was troubling but not surprising. He had testified in 17 custody cases in the past 2 years, and in 15 of those cases, he had recommended removing children from their mother's care. Several of those mothers had fought back through appeals, claiming Dr. Reyes had misdiagnosed them. Sarah dug deeper, using her old prosecutor skills to trace patterns. Dr. Reyes was frequently hired by fathers with powerful legal representation. His testimony consistently favored wealthy men seeking custody from wives who had given up their careers. The pattern was too clear to be coincidental. Her second discovery was even more damning. Elena Rodriguez had referred clients to Dr. Reyes 8 times in the past year. Each time, the father had gained primary custody. Elena was running a pipeline, using her legal connections to help wealthy men destroy their wives' credibility. Sarah printed everything she could, carefully organizing the evidence. But she needed more than patterns and correlations. She needed proof of direct collaboration between Elena, Dr. Reyes, and Marcus. That evening, Marcus came home in an unusually good mood. "Elena tells me your appointment with Dr. Reyes went well," he said, kissing Sarah's cheek as if he actually cared about her well-being. "It was helpful," Sarah lied. "He seems very knowledgeable." "He is. Elena's worked with him on several difficult cases. She has excellent judgment about these things." Sarah bit back the response that came to mind. Instead, she played the part of the grateful wife. "I'm lucky to have you both looking out for me." Marcus beamed, clearly pleased with her attitude adjustment. "That's my girl. Dr. Reyes thinks regular sessions will help stabilize your mood before the baby comes." "About that," Sarah said carefully, "he mentioned that you and Elena had discussed my case before the appointment. I was wondering what specifically you told him." Marcus's expression flickered, just for a moment, but Sarah caught it. "Nothing specific, just that you'd been struggling emotionally. Elena suggested he might be able to help." Another lie. Sarah was building a collection of them. "Well, I appreciate Elena's concern," Sarah said. "It must be difficult for her, being so invested in your work and our family." "Elena is very dedicated," Marcus agreed. "She's been working late every night this week, preparing for the Henderson case." Sarah knew the Henderson case had been settled last month. She also knew that Elena's car had been parked outside the Palmer House Hotel 3 nights this week, not at the office. Private investigators were expensive, but Sarah still had access to some of their joint savings accounts. "You must miss her when she's working so late," Sarah said innocently. Marcus's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I miss having my full team available during business hours." "Yes." They were dancing around the truth, both pretending not to know what the other knew. But Sarah was tired of dancing. It was time to start gathering evidence that would hold up in court. That night, while Marcus slept, Sarah began phase 2 of her investigation. She had 48 hours before her next appointment with Dr. Reyes, and she intended to make them count. The war for her child's future was escalating, but Sarah was no longer fighting defensively. She was going on the attack. Sarah's hands trembled as she uploaded the photos to her secure cloud account. Through the private investigator she'd hired with her emergency credit card, she now had documented proof of Marcus and Elena's affair. Hotel receipts, photographs of them entering Elena's apartment together, text message records showing their coordination. But adultery alone wouldn't win her a custody battle. She needed evidence of their conspiracy to paint her as mentally unstable. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. Reyes' receptionist, Janet, was a woman in her 50s who had worked in medical offices for 30 years. During Sarah's second appointment, Janet had made small talk about the challenges of working with difficult doctors. "Some of them think they know everything," Janet had said, rolling her eyes. "Dr. Reyes is always having these private calls about cases, like patient confidentiality doesn't matter when money's involved." Sarah had filed that comment away, and now she was acting on it. Sitting in her car across from Dr. Reyes' office building, she watched Janet leave for her lunch break. Sarah knew the woman's routine now, 30 minutes at the deli across the street, always carrying her oversized purse that doubled as a lunch bag. "Excuse me," Sarah called out as Janet walked past her car. "I think you dropped this." Sarah held up a $20 bill, knowing it would stop Janet in her tracks. "Oh my," Janet said, looking confused. "I don't think that's mine." "Are you sure? I saw it fall when you walked by." Sarah smiled warmly. "I'm Sarah Mitchell, by the way. I've been seeing Dr. Reyes for prenatal counseling." "Of course! You're the one with the lawyer husband." Janet's expression grew sympathetic. Pregnancy can be so overwhelming, especially with all the pressure these days. Sarah seized the opening. "It really can be. Sometimes I feel like everyone's watching, waiting for me to make a mistake." Janet glanced around, then leaned closer to Sarah's car window. "Can I tell you something, honey? In confidence?" Sarah nodded, her heart racing. "Dr. Reyes has been getting a lot of calls about your case, more than usual, from lawyers, not doctors. That's not normal procedure." "What kind of calls?" "Strategy calls, it sounds like. How to document certain behaviors, What kind of testimony would be most effective in court? Janet shook her head disapprovingly. I've seen this before with wealthy divorces. The whole thing stinks. Sarah felt a mixture of vindication and terror. She had proof that Dr. Reyes was coordinating with Marcus's legal team, but she also realized how far they were willing to go. Janet, Sarah said carefully, if someone hypothetically wanted to document these calls, would that be possible? Janet studied Sarah's face for a long moment. Hypothetically, someone might notice that Dr. Reyes uses speakerphone for all his important calls, and someone might have accidentally recorded portions of those calls while testing the new digital filing system. Sarah's pulse raced. Hypothetically, would those recordings still exist? They might. In the right hands, they could help a woman protect herself and her baby. Janet glanced at her watch. I need to get back. But if someone wanted to have coffee tomorrow morning before work, say at 7 a.m. at the Starbucks on Michigan Avenue, they might learn more about hypothetical situations. As Janet walked away, Sarah sat in her car, shaking with adrenaline. She finally had a path to real evidence, but she also knew that once she went down this road, there would be no turning back. That evening, Marcus came home earlier than usual, whistling. Sarah recognized the tune. It was the song they danced to at their wedding. The irony was almost too much to bear. Good news, Marcus announced, loosening his tie. The Henderson merger went through, and the bonus is substantial. I was thinking we could use some of it to renovate the nursery, make it perfect for our little one. Sarah forced herself to smile. That sounds wonderful. Elena has some excellent ideas about child-safe design. She's been researching pediatric psychology, understanding what kind of environment promotes healthy development. The casual way Marcus inserted Elena into every aspect of their life was like a knife twisting in Sarah's chest. But she had learned to control her reactions. Elena seems very invested in our family, Sarah observed. She is. She understands how important family is to a man's success. Marcus moved to the bar cart, pouring his evening scotch. Speaking of which, Dr. Reyes called today. He's concerned about your progress. Sarah's blood chilled. Concerned how? He thinks you're still experiencing paranoid ideation, suspicions about people who care about you, resistance to treatment recommendations. Such your name. Marcus took a sip of his drink, watching Sarah over the rim of the glass. He's recommending more intensive therapy, perhaps some time in a controlled environment where you can focus on healing. The words controlled environment hit Sarah like a physical blow. They were moving faster than she'd anticipated. What kind of controlled environment? Sarah asked, proud that her voice remained steady. There's a private facility in Lake Forest. Specializes in pregnancy-related mental health issues. Very discreet, very comfortable. Elena knows the director from another case. Of course she does, Sarah thought. Elena's network of corruption seemed to extend everywhere. How long would I need to stay there? That would depend on your progress. Dr. Reyes thinks a few weeks of intensive treatment could prevent a more serious breakdown after the baby's born. Sarah nodded thoughtfully, buying time while her mind raced. A few weeks in a psychiatric facility would give them everything they needed to prove she was an unfit mother. Once she was committed, even voluntarily, it would be nearly impossible to regain credibility in a custody battle. Can I think about it? Sarah asked. Marcus's expression darkened slightly. Sarah, this isn't really optional. Dr. Reyes is filing a report with the Department of Children and Family Services tomorrow. He's concerned about the baby's welfare. The room seemed to tilt around Sarah. A DCFS report would trigger an immediate investigation. They could remove her baby at birth if they deemed her unstable. I need some air, Sarah said, standing carefully. Sarah, don't be dramatic. This is for your own good. But Sarah was already moving toward the door, her mind crystal clear for the first time in months. She had perhaps 12 hours before Dr. Reyes filed his report. 12 hours to gather enough evidence to expose the conspiracy before they destroyed her completely. As she walked through the cool evening air along Lakeshore Drive, Sarah felt her old prosecutor instincts taking over. She had spent years building cases against powerful people who thought they were untouchable. Marcus and Elena had made the mistake of treating her like a victim instead of the formidable opponent she used to be. It was time to remind them who Sarah Mitchell really was. The baby kicked strongly, as if in agreement. Sarah placed her hand on her belly and made a promise. Tomorrow we fight back. 20 hours until her meeting with Janet? 20 hours to prepare for the battle of her life. At 7 a.m. sharp, Sarah sat in the corner booth at Starbucks on Michigan Avenue, her hands wrapped around a decaf latte for warmth more than caffeine. The morning crowd rushed past the windows, everyone focused on their own lives, oblivious to the drama unfolding in their midst. Janet arrived exactly on time, looking nervous but determined. She slid into the booth across from Sarah, a large manila envelope clutched against her chest. "I've been thinking about this all night," Janet said without preamble. "What they're doing to you isn't right. I've seen too many women destroyed by men who use the system against them." Sarah leaned forward, her voice low. "What did you find?" Janet glanced around the coffee shop, then opened the envelope. Inside were printed transcripts and a small digital recorder. 3 weeks of calls," Janet said quietly. "Dr. Reyes doesn't know that the new phone system automatically records everything for quality assurance. I've been transcribing them during my lunch breaks." Sarah's hands shook as she read the first transcript. "Dr. Reyes, the Mitchell situation is proceeding as planned. I'll have enough documentation by next week to support an emergency custody order. Elena Rodriguez. Marcus is getting impatient. The senator's wife is still questioning his ability to control his household. Dr. Reyes. One more session should do it. I'll recommend immediate hospitalization for observation. Once she's committed, even voluntarily, the custody case becomes straightforward. Elena. And your fee, Dr. Reyes, 50,000 as agreed, plus my standard testimony rate for the custody hearing." Sarah felt sick. They were discussing her life, her baby's future, like a business transaction. The second transcript was even worse. Marcus Mitchell. "What if she refuses hospitalization?" Dr. Reyes. "I'll file a report claiming she's a danger to herself and the unborn child. Illinois law allows emergency psychiatric holds for pregnant women who pose a risk to fetal development." Marcus. "How long can you hold her?" Dr. Reyes. 72 hours initially, renewable if I document continued instability. That should be enough time to establish grounds for emergency custody. Elena. "The timing needs to be perfect. If she's hospitalized when the baby's born, Marcus can petition for immediate guardianship." Sarah's vision blurred with rage and terror. They had planned every detail, every legal maneuver designed to separate her from her child. "There's more," Janet said, sliding another document across the table. "This is Dr. Reyes's patient notes about you. Look at the dates." Sarah examined the notes and felt her blood freeze. Dr. Reyes had been writing detailed assessments of her mental state for 3 weeks before their first appointment. The notes documented paranoid behavior, mood instability, and potential danger to the unborn child, all dated before he'd ever met her. "He fabricated everything," Sarah whispered. "It gets worse," Janet said grimly. "I found his billing records. Elena's law firm has paid him over $200,000 in the past year for consultation on custody cases. Always the same pattern. Wealthy father, stay-at-home mother, mysterious mental health crisis that requires emergency intervention." Sarah stared at the evidence spread across the coffee shop table. It was enough to destroy all three of them, but only if she could get it to the right people before they moved against her. "Janet, why are you helping me?" The older woman's eyes filled with tears. "Because 20 years ago, I was you. My ex-husband was a judge, and when I tried to leave him, he had me committed for observation. By the time I got out, he had custody of my daughter, and I was labeled an unfit mother. I never got her back." Sarah reached across the table and squeezed Janet's hand. "I'm going to stop them, not just for me, but for every woman they've done this to." "What do you need from me?" Sarah thought quickly. She had evidence of the conspiracy, but she needed to present it to someone who couldn't be bought or intimidated. "Can you get me Dr. Reyes's complete client list for the past 2 years? Every woman he's diagnosed with pregnancy-related mental illness?" "That might take a few days." "I don't have a few days. They're filing the DCFS report today." Janet nodded grimly. "Then we do this the hard way. I'll pull the files during lunch and scan everything. But Sarah, once I do this, I'm finished. Dr. Reyes will know it was me. I'll make sure you're protected, I promise." As they parted ways, Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for Janet, for all the women Marcus and Elena had destroyed, for every mother who had been separated from her child by corrupt men in positions of power. Her first call was to her former boss at the district attorney's office. Lisa Chen had been Sarah's mentor and was now the assistant district attorney for white-collar crime. "Sarah?" Lisa's voice was surprised but warm. "I haven't heard from you in months. How's married life treating you?" "Lisa, I need your help. I'm about to blow open a conspiracy involving psychiatric fraud, judicial corruption, and systematic abuse of the family court system." There was a pause. "Are you serious?" "Dead serious. And I have recordings. Meet me at my office in an hour. Come alone and bring everything you have." As Sarah walked toward the DA's office, she felt her old confidence returning. For months, she had been playing defense, reacting to Marcus's moves instead of making her own. Now she was back in familiar territory, building a case, gathering evidence, preparing to take down corrupt officials who thought they were above the law. The baby kicked strongly, and Sarah smiled for the first time in weeks. "Hold on, little one," she whispered. "Mommy's going to work." Marcus and Elena thought they had won. They were about to learn that Sarah Mitchell wasn't just a prosecutor who had given up her career for marriage. She was a prosecutor who had been preparing for the case of her life. Lisa Chen's office in the Cook County District Attorney's building felt like stepping back into Sarah's old life. The familiar chaos of legal documents, evidence boxes, and case files reminded her of who she used to be before Marcus convinced her that her career was less important than his image. "Jesus, Sarah," Lisa breathed, reviewing the audio recordings on her computer. "This is a RICO case waiting to happen. Conspiracy, fraud, extortion, abusive process." She looked up at her former protege with a mixture of admiration and concern. "Are you absolutely certain you want to go down this road? These people will destroy you if they can." Sarah placed her hands on her belly, feeling the baby's restless movement. "They're already trying to destroy me. The difference is now I'm fighting back." Lisa nodded slowly. "Okay, here's what we're going to do. I'm opening an immediate investigation into Dr. Reyes's practice and Elena Rodriguez's client referrals. But Sarah, this needs to go beyond the DA's office. We need federal involvement." "Why federal?" "Because if Elena and Dr. Reyes are running this scheme across state lines, and if they're using interstate communications to coordinate, it becomes wire fraud and conspiracy under federal jurisdiction. The FBI takes this kind of systematic corruption very seriously." Sarah felt a surge of hope. "Can you make that happen?" "I have a contact at the Chicago FBI field office. Agent Patricia Blackwood specializes in white-collar crime and public corruption. She's good, and she's tough." Lisa reached for her phone. "But we need to move fast. If they're filing DCFS reports today, we have maybe 6 hours before they try to have you committed." Irai. While Lisa made her calls, Sarah reviewed the evidence one more time. The audio recordings were damning, but she needed to think like Marcus would think. How would he try to discredit her testimony? The answer came to her immediately. They would claim she was having a paranoid episode, that she had fabricated or misinterpreted the evidence because of her unstable mental state. Dr. Reyes would testify that paranoid delusions about conspiracy were a classic symptom of pregnancy-induced psychosis. Sarah needed corroborating witnesses and independent verification of the evidence. "Lisa," Sarah said, interrupting her mentor's phone conversation, "I need you to have your tech people verify these recordings immediately. Chain of custody, digital forensics, the whole 9 yards. If this goes to trial, Marcus's lawyers will claim I doctored the audio." Lisa nodded approvingly. "Good thinking. I'll have our cyber crimes unit run a complete analysis." She hung up the phone with a satisfied expression. "Agent Blackwood can see us in 2 hours. She's very interested in what we have." Sarah spent those 2 hours preparing for the most important presentation of her life. She organized the evidence chronologically, created a timeline of events, and wrote a comprehensive summary of the conspiracy. Her old prosecutorial skills felt rusty at first, but quickly sharpened as she worked. The Chicago FBI field office occupied several floors of a downtown federal building. Agent Blackwood met them in a secure conference room, her expression serious but encouraging. "Mrs. Mitchell," Agent Blackwood said, "Lisa's given me the overview. Before we begin, I want you to know that if even half of what you've described is true, We're looking at a systematic pattern of civil rights violations that falls squarely under federal jurisdiction. For the next hour, Sarah presented her case with the precision and clarity that had once made her one of the DA's office's rising stars. She walked Agent Blackwood through the audio recordings, the fabricated medical records, the pattern of referrals between Elena and Dr. Reyes, and the financial connections that proved their conspiracy. Agent Blackwood asked sharp questions, probing for weaknesses in the evidence and alternative explanations for the facts. But as the presentation continued, her expression grew increasingly grim. Mrs. Mitchell, based on what you've shown me, I'm prepared to open an immediate federal investigation. But I need you to understand something. The moment we move against these people, they're going to know you're the source. They'll escalate their efforts to discredit you. Sarah had been expecting this. What do you recommend? We place you in protective custody immediately. Federal safe house, 24-hour security, medical support for your pregnancy. You disappear until we can make arrests. For how long? 2 to 3 weeks if everything goes smoothly. We need time to gather additional evidence, interview other victims, and coordinate with state authorities. Sarah felt torn. Protective custody would keep her and the baby safe, but it would also mean disappearing just when Marcus expected her to submit to psychiatric evaluation. Her absence would give him ammunition to claim she was having a complete breakdown. Agent Blackwood, is there another option? Something that lets me stay visible while still being protected? The FBI agent and Lisa exchanged glances. What are you thinking? Lisa asked. What if we let them make their move? Let them file the DCFS report. Let Dr. Reyes try to have me committed. But this time, we're ready for them. We document everything they do, gather evidence of their illegal actions in real time. Agent Blackwood shook her head. Too dangerous. If they succeed in having you committed, even temporarily, it could take months to undo the legal damage. But if we catch them in the act, if we record them fabricating evidence and manipulating the system, we have them dead to rights. Sarah was thinking like a prosecutor again, weighing risks against potential outcomes. How quickly can you get surveillance equipment, recording devices, wireless transmission, the works? Sarah, Lisa said carefully, what you're describing is essentially going undercover against your own husband while 8 months pregnant. The physical and emotional stress alone could be dangerous. The stress of losing my baby will be worse, Sarah replied firmly. Agent Blackwood, if you wire me up and provide backup, can you guarantee you'll be able to intervene before they do permanent damage? Agent Blackwood studied Sarah for a long moment. You're talking about walking into the lion's den wearing a wire. These people have already shown they're willing to destroy you. If they discover what you're doing, then you arrest them for obstruction of justice and threatening a federal witness, Sarah finished. Agent Blackwood, I'm not asking you to put me at risk. I'm asking you to help me turn the tables on people who have been systematically destroying families for profit. After another long pause, Agent Blackwood nodded slowly. Okay, Mrs. Mitchell, we'll do this your way. But the moment things go sideways, the moment we think you're in real danger, we're pulling you out. Sarah felt the baby kick, as if in approval. When do we start? Now, Agent Blackwood said, reaching for her phone. Because according to my contacts at DCFS, your husband filed his report an hour ago. They'll be looking for you before the end of the day. The war for Sarah's child was about to begin in earnest. But this time, Sarah would be fighting with the full weight of federal law enforcement behind her. And Marcus and Elena had no idea what was coming. The FBI's technical team worked with impressive efficiency. Within 3 hours, Sarah was wearing a nearly invisible recording device and transmitter, both designed to survive the kind of physical stress that might come with pregnancy and potential confrontation. Agent Blackwood's team would monitor everything from a surveillance van parked 2 blocks from Sarah's apartment building. Remember, Agent Blackwood said as they ran final equipment checks, your goal is to get them to admit their conspiracy on tape. Don't push too hard. Don't ask leading questions. Just let them talk. Narcissists like your husband love to explain how clever they are. Sarah nodded, her hand resting on her belly. The baby had been restless all day, as if sensing the tension. What about the DCFS investigation? We've contacted the assigned caseworker. Agent Martinez will be posing as a DCFS supervisor, monitoring their investigation. If they try to remove you before we're ready, We'll intervene immediately." As Sarah walked back into her apartment building, she felt the familiar calm that used to settle over her before important court appearances. She was nervous, but it was the productive nervousness of someone who had prepared thoroughly and was ready for battle. Marcus was waiting in the living room, pacing like a caged animal. His usual composed demeanor had cracks in it, and Sarah realized that the DCFS report had probably not gone as smoothly as he'd expected. "There you are," Marcus said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Where have you been? Dr. Reyes has been trying to reach you all day." "I went for a walk," Sarah said calmly. "I needed to think about what you said last night." "And?" Sarah took a deep breath, knowing that her next words would set everything in motion. "I think you're right. I think I do need help." Marcus's expression immediately shifted to relief and satisfaction. "I'm so glad you're being reasonable about this. Dr. Reyes has arranged for immediate admission to the Willow Creek facility. Elena's driving up there tonight to handle the paperwork." "Tonight?" Sarah injected just the right amount of anxiety into her voice. "That seems very fast." "Sarah, darling, sometimes fast action is necessary. Dr. Reyes received some concerning information today that made him worry about your immediate safety." Sarah's heart raced, but she kept her voice steady. "What kind of information?" Marcus sat beside her on the sofa, taking her hands in what looked like a caring gesture. "The DCFS caseworker called him. They've received reports about your erratic behavior, your paranoid episodes. Dr. Reyes is concerned that waiting any longer could put both you and the baby at risk." "Reports from whom?" Sarah asked, knowing the answer. "From people who care about you. Elena's been documenting incidents for weeks, just in case professional intervention became necessary." There it was. Elena had been building a file against Sarah, documenting alleged incidents that Sarah knew had never happened. "What kind of incidents?" Marcus squeezed her hands, his voice taking on the patronizing tone she had learned to hate. "Times when you seemed disconnected from reality, when you made accusations about people trying to hurt you, when you exhibited signs of paranoid thinking." Sarah forced herself to look grateful instead of furious. "I don't remember those incidents. That's part of the problem, sweetheart. Memory gaps, confusion about what's real and what isn't. It's all very concerning." The apartment door opened, and Elena walked in carrying a leather briefcase and wearing the expression of someone who thought she had already won. "Sarah," Elena said with false warmth, "I'm so glad Marcus convinced you to get help. The Willow Creek facility is absolutely first-rate, very private, very discreet." "Elena's been researching treatment options for weeks," Marcus added. "She's really gone above and beyond to help us through this difficult time." Sarah looked between them, these two people who were plotting to steal her child, and felt a cold rage settle in her chest. But she channeled that anger into her performance. "I'm scared," Sarah said, allowing her voice to tremble. "What if they don't let me come home? What if something happens to the baby while I'm there?" Elena sat on Sarah's other side, completing the circle of false concern. "Sarah, honey, that's exactly the kind of paranoid thinking Dr. Reyes is worried about. The facility is completely safe. They specialize in high-risk pregnancies." "But what about afterward? After the baby's born?" Marcus and Elena exchanged a look that Sarah caught immediately. It was a look of satisfaction, of plans coming together perfectly. "We'll cross that bridge when we come to it," Marcus said carefully. "The important thing is getting you stable first." Elena leaned forward, her voice taking on a confidential tone. "Sarah, can I be honest with you? Woman to woman?" Sarah nodded, bracing herself. "Marcus has been struggling with this situation for months. The stress of worrying about you, about the baby, about his career. It's been enormous. Some of his colleagues have been questioning whether he can handle the demands of public office if he can't manage his personal life. What Elena's saying," Marcus added, "is that getting you help isn't just about your health. It's about our family's future, about the opportunities we'll have to provide for our child." Sarah felt sick. They were blaming her mental health for Marcus's political problems, while simultaneously destroying her credibility to solve those problems. "I understand," Sarah said quietly. "You're both right. I need help." "Excellent," Elena said, opening her briefcase. "I've prepared all the admission paperwork. We can drive up tonight and get you settled." As Elena spread documents across the coffee table, Sarah caught sight of familiar legal language. She was looking at commitment papers, not voluntary admission forms. Elena, Sarah said carefully, these look like involuntary commitment documents. Elena's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the cold calculation underneath. They're just precautionary, Sarah. In case you change your mind or have an episode during admission, Dr. Reyes recommended them as a safety measure. But I thought this was voluntary treatment. Marcus's voice grew firm. Sarah, you're starting to sound paranoid again. Elena's trying to help you, and you're questioning her motives. This is exactly the kind of thinking that concerns Dr. Reyes. I'm sorry, Sarah said quickly. You're right. I'm not thinking clearly. Elena's smile returned. It's okay, honey. That's why we're here to help you make good decisions. As Sarah pretended to review the paperwork, she felt the baby kick strongly, as if in protest. She placed her hand on her belly and made a silent promise. These people would not win. There's just one thing, Sarah said as Elena gathered the signed documents. I'd like to call my mother first. Let her know what's happening. Marcus frowned. Sarah, we've discussed this. Your mother tends to overreact, and stress isn't good for you right now. Please, Sarah said, allowing desperation to creep into her voice. I just need to hear her voice before I go. Elena checked her watch. 5 minutes. We need to leave soon to get you admitted tonight. Sarah walked into the bedroom and closed the door, knowing that Marcus and Elena would assume she was making an emotional goodbye call to her mother. Instead, she whispered to her wire. They have involuntary commitment papers. They're planning to drive me to Willow Creek tonight. Elena's briefcase has what looks like custody documents. In the surveillance van 2 blocks away, Agent Blackwood spoke into her radio. All units, target is moving tonight. Prepare for mobile surveillance and potential intervention. Sarah returned to the living room, her face composed. I'm ready, she said. As they gathered their things, Marcus put his arm around Sarah's shoulders in what looked like a supportive gesture. You're doing the right thing, darling. For all of us. But Sarah was no longer afraid. She had them on tape admitting to false documentation, discussing involuntary commitment, and revealing their conspiracy to manipulate the system. Now she just needed to survive the next few hours until Agent Blackwood could make her arrests. The final phase of the battle was beginning. The drive to Willow Creek took 45 minutes through the darkening suburbs north of Chicago. Sarah sat in the back seat of Elena's BMW, watching the city lights fade into rural darkness, while Marcus rode in the passenger seat discussing logistics like she wasn't there. Dr. Steinberg is expecting us by 9, Elena said, checking her phone while navigating the winding road. He's already reviewed Sarah's file and agreed with Dr. Reyes's assessment. How long before we can move forward with the custody petition? Marcus asked. Sarah's blood ran cold. They were discussing custody arrangements while driving her to a psychiatric facility. The arrogance was breathtaking. 48 hours minimum, Elena replied. Once she's been observed and Dr. Steinberg confirms the diagnosis, we can file for emergency guardianship citing immediate risk to the fetus. And the baby? Born in the facility under medical supervision, with you as the designated guardian due to maternal incapacity. Clean, legal, uncontestable. Sarah fought to keep her breathing steady. They had planned every detail from her commitment to her baby's birth to the legal framework that would separate them permanently. What about her family? Marcus asked. Her mother's been calling. Handled, Elena said confidently. I've drafted a statement explaining that Sarah suffered a complete nervous breakdown and is receiving private treatment. Her mother will be told that contact with family is contraindicated during the acute phase of treatment. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of their betrayal. They weren't just stealing her child. They were isolating her from everyone who might help her. The Willow Creek facility appeared through the trees like something from a Gothic novel. It was a sprawling Victorian mansion converted into a medical facility, surrounded by high walls and security gates. Discreet signs marked it as a private wellness center, but Sarah could see the reinforced windows and electronic locks that marked it as something far more sinister. Dr. Steinberg met them at the entrance, a thin man with cold eyes and the kind of professional smile that never reached his face. Sarah recognized the type immediately. Another Dr. Reyes, another corrupt professional willing to destroy lives for money. Mrs. Mitchell, Dr. Steinberg said, his voice professionally concerned, Dr. Reyes has briefed me thoroughly on your case. We're going to take excellent care of you. As they walked through the facility's main hall, Sarah noticed details that confirmed her worst fears. The common areas were designed to look comfortable, but every door required a key card to open. The windows had reinforced glass and no latches. The nursing staff moved with the efficiency of people accustomed to managing unwilling patients. "Let's get you settled in your room," Dr. Steinberg said, leading them down a corridor lined with patient rooms. "Then we can discuss your treatment plan." Sarah's room was on the third floor, furnished like an expensive hotel suite, but with all the hidden features of a prison cell. The bathroom door couldn't be locked from the inside. The window showed a 3-story drop to concrete. The bed had restraint attachments hidden under decorative covers. "Very nice," Marcus said, looking around approvingly. "Sarah, you'll be comfortable here." Elena was already setting up her briefcase on the room's small desk, arranging legal documents with practiced efficiency. "Dr. Steinberg will need documentation of Mrs. Mitchell's condition for legal purposes. Her husband is filing for emergency guardianship to protect the unborn child." "Of course," Dr. Steinberg replied. "We have extensive experience with these situations. Our documentation will be comprehensive and legally sound." Sarah felt trapped, but she forced herself to remember that Agent Blackwood's team was monitoring everything. They knew where she was, and they had recorded Marcus and Elena's admissions of conspiracy. She just needed to survive until federal agents could move. "I'm scared," Sarah said, playing her role one last time. "What if something happens to the baby while I'm here?" Dr. Steinberg's smile became even more patronizing. "Mrs. Mitchell, that's exactly the kind of irrational fear that indicates the severity of your condition. You're experiencing paranoid ideation about threats to your unborn child that simply don't exist." "But what if—" "Sarah," Marcus interrupted firmly, "you need to trust the professionals. Dr. Steinberg knows what's best for you and the baby." Elena looked up from her documents. "Actually, Mrs. Mitchell, your concerns about the baby are part of why we're here. Dr. Reyes believes you might be at risk for postpartum psychosis, which could make you dangerous to your own child." Sarah stared at Elena, amazed by the woman's casual cruelty. "Dangerous?" "Mothers with untreated pregnancy-related psychosis have been known to harm their babies," Dr. Steinberg explained in his clinical voice. "It's rare, but the risk is real. That's why early intervention is so important." They were building the framework to justify taking her baby by painting her as a potential threat to her own child. Sarah felt a rage so pure it was almost clarifying. "I would never hurt my baby," Sarah said quietly. "Of course you wouldn't intend to," Elena said with false sympathy. "But intention and capability are different things when someone is experiencing a break from reality." Marcus checked his watch. "We should let Sarah rest. It's been a long day, and she needs to focus on getting better." As they prepared to leave, Sarah felt panic rising in her chest. Once they walked out that door, she would be completely at the mercy of Dr. Steinberg and his staff. But she forced herself to remain calm. "When will I see you again?" Sarah asked Marcus. "That depends on your progress," Marcus replied. "Dr. Steinberg will determine when you're ready for visitors." Elena closed her briefcase with a satisfied snap. "Don't worry, Sarah. We'll take care of everything while you focus on healing." After they left, Sarah was alone with Dr. Steinberg and a nurse who had appeared with a wheelchair. "Let's get you changed into more comfortable clothes," the nurse said, indicating a hospital gown laid out on the bed. "I'd prefer to keep my own clothes," Sarah said. Dr. Steinberg's expression hardened slightly. "Mrs. Mitchell, compliance with facility protocols is part of your treatment. Resistance to reasonable requests is often a sign of escalating paranoia." Sarah realized that every refusal, every question, every sign of independent thought would be documented as evidence of her mental instability. She was trapped in a system designed to prove her incompetence through her very attempts to prove her competence. "Of course," Sarah said, forcing herself to comply. "I want to get better." As the nurse helped her change, Sarah felt the small recording device still securely in place. Agent Blackwood's team knew where she was and had hours of recorded evidence of the conspiracy. She just needed to trust that federal law enforcement would move before Marcus and Elena could complete their plan. But as the nurse led her to the common area for evening medication, Sarah realized she was running out of time faster than she had anticipated. Dr. Steinberg approached with a small paper cup containing several pills. "What are these?" Sarah asked. "Mild sedatives and mood stabilizers," Dr. Steinberg replied. "Nothing that will harm the baby, but necessary to manage your anxiety and paranoid thinking." Sarah stared at the pills, knowing that once she was medicated, her ability to think clearly and respond appropriately would be compromised. Everything she said or did under the influence of psychiatric drugs could be used as evidence of her instability. "I'd prefer not to take medication while pregnant," Sarah said carefully. Dr. Steinberg's smile vanished. "Mrs. Mitchell, refusal to take prescribed medication is a serious indicator of non-compliance and poor insight into your condition. I'm afraid I'll have to document this as evidence of deteriorating mental status." Sarah looked around the common area and saw other patients in various states of sedation, some clearly pregnant women who looked lost and confused. She realized that Willow Creek wasn't just where they brought her to be committed, it was where they brought all the inconvenient wives, all the women who stood in the way of powerful men's ambitions. As Dr. Steinberg waited for her decision, Sarah made a silent prayer that Agent Blackwood would move soon. Because if she was forced to take the medication, if she lost the clarity to defend herself, Marcus and Elena would have won. The final battle for her child's future was happening right now, in a common room that looked like a hotel lobby, but felt like a prison. Agent Blackwood's voice crackled through the radio of the FBI tactical van parked outside Willow Creek's gates. "Target has been inside for 37 minutes. Audio transmission confirms illegal detention and conspiracy to commit fraud. All units, we are green for go." Inside the facility, Sarah stared at the pills in Dr. Steinberg's outstretched hand, knowing that her next decision would determine everything. But before she could respond, the building's fire alarm began shrieking. "What's happening?" Dr. Steinberg demanded, turning toward the nursing station. Through the common room windows, Sarah saw black SUVs racing up the circular driveway, their emergency lights cutting through the darkness. Her heart leaped with hope and relief. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is the FBI." Agent Blackwood's amplified voice echoed across the facility grounds. "This building is surrounded. Dr. Steinberg, Marcus Mitchell, and Elena Rodriguez are under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, and civil rights violations." Dr. Steinberg's face went white as tactical agents and FBI windbreakers poured through the facility's entrance. The pills scattered across the floor as he stepped backward, his professional composure crumbling. "There must be some mistake," Dr. Steinberg stammered. "This is a private medical facility. You have no jurisdiction here." Agent Blackwood strode into the common room, her badge visible, her expression grimly satisfied. "Dr. Steinberg, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, filing false medical reports, and violation of civil rights under color of law." Sarah felt tears of relief streaming down her face as FBI agents moved efficiently through the facility, securing evidence and interviewing staff members. Several pregnant women in the common area looked confused but hopeful, as if they too might be rescued from whatever nightmare had brought them here. "Mrs. Mitchell," Agent Blackwood said, approaching Sarah with a gentle expression, "are you injured? Do you need medical attention?" "The baby's fine," Sarah said, her hand moving instinctively to her belly, "but Dr. Steinberg was trying to force me to take psychiatric medication." Agent Blackwood's expression darkened. "Dr. Steinberg, you were about to administer medication to a federal witness without informed consent while she was under illegal detention. That's another felony." As Dr. Steinberg was led away in handcuffs, Agent Blackwood turned back to Sarah. "Mrs. Mitchell, we have Marcus and Elena in custody. They were arrested at your apartment while celebrating what they thought was your successful commitment." Sarah felt a savage satisfaction at that news. "What happens now?" "Now you go home to prepare for the birth of your baby," Agent Blackwood said with a smile, "and then you help us send these people to federal prison for a very long time." 2 hours later, Sarah stood in her apartment kitchen, making tea with hands that had finally stopped shaking. The space felt different now, cleared of Marcus's oppressive presence and Elena's toxic influence. For the first time in months, Sarah felt like she could breathe freely. Agent Blackwood sat at the kitchen table, reviewing the evidence they had gathered. "The recordings you helped us obtain are devastating. Marcus and Elena implicated themselves in multiple felonies, and Dr. Reyes's cooperation is giving us insight into a much larger network of corruption." "Dr. Reyes is cooperating?" Faced with federal charges and the loss of his medical license, he's been very forthcoming about his arrangement with Elena's law firm. "We've identified at least 30 other cases where they use similar tactics to separate mothers from their children." Sarah felt sick thinking about all the women who had been destroyed by this conspiracy. What will happen to those families? That's where you come in, Agent Blackwood said. The U.S. Attorney's Office wants you to consider becoming a cooperating witness. Your legal background and direct experience with their tactics make you invaluable for prosecuting not just your case, but the entire network. Sarah considered the offer. Testifying would mean reliving the trauma of the past months, but it would also mean justice for all the women who had been silenced and separated from their children. What about Marcus and Elena? What are they facing? Marcus is looking at conspiracy, fraud, obstruction of justice, and civil rights violations. Elena faces the same charges plus abuse of process and professional misconduct. If convicted on all counts, they're both looking at 15 to 20 years in federal prison. Sarah felt no satisfaction in Marcus's downfall, only a deep sadness for what their marriage had become. But she felt fierce joy at the thought of Elena facing consequences for her cruelty. Agent Blackwood, I'll testify, not just for myself, but for every woman they destroyed. 3 weeks later, Sarah gave birth to a healthy baby boy in Northwestern Memorial Hospital, surrounded by federal marshals who ensured her safety and security. She named him David after her father, the man whose integrity had shaped her sense of justice. Marcus was denied bail and awaited trial in federal custody. Elena's legal career was over, her law license suspended pending the outcome of her criminal case. Dr. Reyes had been arrested in connection with a nationwide investigation into psychiatric fraud in family court cases. But for Sarah, the real victory wasn't their downfall. It was holding her son in her arms, knowing that he would grow up with a mother who had fought for him, who had refused to be silenced or broken. 6 months after David's birth, Sarah stood at the podium of the Hart Senate Office building in Washington, D.C., preparing to address a congressional subcommittee on family court reform. Her testimony would be broadcast live, reaching millions of viewers who needed to understand how the system designed to protect families could be weaponized to destroy them. Senators, my name is Sarah Mitchell, and I am here to tell you about a conspiracy that separated me from my unborn child and attempted to destroy my life for the financial gain of corrupt professionals. Sumrinam. The hearing room was packed with journalists, legal experts, and advocates for family court reform. In the front row, Janet from Dr. Reyes's office sat beside several other women whose lives had been shattered by the same conspiracy. They had found each other through the federal investigation and formed a support network that Sarah now helped coordinate. The system that was meant to protect my child instead became a weapon used against me by people who exploited the trust we place in medical and legal professionals. Dr. Reyes, Elena Rodriguez, and my former husband, Marcus Mitchell, represent a pattern of corruption that extends far beyond my individual case. Sarah's voice grew stronger as she continued, drawing on the confidence she had rebuilt over the past months. She had returned to work part-time at the district attorney's office, specializing in cases involving domestic violence and family court corruption. Her experience had made her a formidable advocate for other victims. Today, Marcus Mitchell is serving a 14-year federal sentence for conspiracy and civil rights violations. Elena Rodriguez received 12 years for her role in the scheme. Dr. Reyes is serving 10 years and has surrendered his medical license. But the real victory, Sarah explained, was in the systemic changes their prosecutions had triggered. 17 other doctors had been investigated for similar fraud. 12 family court judges had been censured or removed from domestic relations cases. New protocols required independent oversight of psychiatric evaluations in custody cases. The most important thing I want you to understand, Sarah concluded, is that this conspiracy succeeded for so long because it exploited societal assumptions about women, mental health, and maternal fitness. They counted on the fact that once a woman was labeled unstable, no one would believe her claims of persecution. After her testimony, Sarah joined Agent Blackwood for lunch in a quiet restaurant near Capitol Hill. The FBI agent had become more than a colleague. She was a friend who understood the unique trauma of fighting corruption from within the system. "How does it feel?" Agent Blackwood asked as they reviewed the positive media coverage of Sarah's testimony. "Like I'm finally myself again," Sarah replied honestly. "For so long I defined myself by what I had lost. My career, my independence, my identity. Now I define myself by what I've built back." Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from her childcare provider, accompanied by a photo of 10-month-old David taking his first tentative steps. His father was in federal prison, but David would grow up knowing that his mother had fought for justice and won. "Any word on the civil suits?" Agent Blackwood asked. Sarah nodded. "The law firm that employed Elena has agreed to a settlement for all the families affected by their scheme. It won't undo the damage, but it will provide resources for therapy, legal fees, and education funds for the children who were separated from their mothers." The civil settlements were substantial, but Sarah's real focus was on the foundation she had established to help other women navigate similar situations. The Sarah Mitchell Foundation provided legal aid, mental health support, and advocacy for women facing family court corruption. "You know what I'm proudest of?" Sarah said, looking at the photo of her son. "David will grow up in a world where what happened to me is less likely to happen to other mothers. The laws we helped change, the protocols we helped establish, the awareness we've raised, that's his real inheritance." As Sarah walked back to Union Station to catch her train to Chicago, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. 18 months ago, she had been a broken woman cowering in a psychiatric facility, facing the loss of her child to her husband's ambitions and her lover's greed. Today, she was a federal witness whose testimony had led to systemic reform, a prosecutor specializing in family court corruption, and a mother raising her son with the confidence that came from having fought the most important battle of her life and won. The train pulled out of Washington as the sun set over the Potomac, carrying Sarah home to Chicago, to her son, and to the life she had built from the ashes of betrayal. She had learned that justice wasn't just about punishment, it was about transformation. She had transformed herself from victim to advocate, from broken wife to empowered mother, from silenced woman to powerful voice for change. Marcus and Elena had tried to destroy her by exploiting the system's weaknesses. Instead, they had helped her discover her own strength and given her a mission that would define the rest of her life. As the train rolled through the darkness toward home, Sarah smiled, thinking of David waiting for her. Tomorrow she would continue building the world she wanted him to inherit, a world where justice was possible, where corruption could be defeated, and where mothers like her could fight back and win. The story that began with betrayal had become a story of redemption, not just for Sarah, but for every woman who would benefit from the changes her courage had made possible. Sarah's story doesn't end here. Today, the Sarah Mitchell Foundation continues to help women facing similar situations, and the legal reforms her courage brought about have protected countless families from the kind of corruption she faced. But there are still women out there fighting battles like Sarah's, still facing systems that seem designed to silence them, still wondering if they have the strength to stand up against impossible odds. If you know someone who needs to hear Sarah's story, someone who needs to know that they're not alone and that justice is possible, please share this video with them. Stories like this only reach the people who need them most when viewers like you help spread the word. A simple like tells the algorithm that this story matters. A comment sharing your thoughts creates a community of people who believe in justice. And subscribing to this channel ensures you'll never miss another story of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Because here's what I've learned from stories like Sarah's. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision to act despite that fear. It's the choice to fight back when everything seems hopeless. It's the refusal to let powerful people destroy what you love most. If Sarah's journey inspired you, if her transformation from victim to victor gave you hope, if her fight for justice reminded you of your own strength, then hit that like button now. Leave a comment telling me what part of her story moved you most, and subscribe, because I promise you this. Every week, I'll bring you another story that proves ordinary people can achieve extraordinary things when they refuse to give up. The next story I share might be about someone fighting corruption in their workplace, or a parent taking on a broken school system, or a community standing up to environmental destruction. But whatever the challenge, the message will be the same. You are stronger than you think, justice is possible, and your voice matters. Thank you for listening to Sarah's story. Thank you for believing that one person can make a difference. And thank you for being part of a community that refuses to let the powerful silence the powerless. I'll see you in the next video, with another story that will remind you of the incredible things that happen when ordinary people decide they've had enough. Until then, remember Sarah's words. When the system fails you, don't become a victim of the system. Become someone who changes it.